Trey, and Tori can make it tonight. She has parent-teacher conferences. So I would like you to look at this list. So this comes from Moll's Funds of Knowledge, which we'll talk about in just a minute, but it's pretty foundational to education. Essentially, it's the idea that all kids have some sort of fund or asset or worth, something they can bring to the table. But before we talk about kids, I would like to know if you have any funds of knowledge in any of these areas, and you'll see at the end I put something else. But Moll shares a lot of these, and these are pretty similar to some of the culture work that we did early in the year too. But I'm wondering if any of you have any funds of knowledge in any of these areas or anything you'd like to share. And again, that's something where you bring a lot to the table. You've got a unique experience, unique talent, unique ability, something like that. So take a few minutes to think about that. When you've got something, let me know. You don't have to find one for all of them. Just like one example is fine. But if you have a few that would be good, that'd be great. Any ideas sparked for anybody?
What does family occupations?
Yeah, good question. So a good example, like I can share personally, both my parents were teachers. And so for me, it was like sort of like, I went into journalism before I was a teacher, but it's sort of having that base of understanding like that was their profession. I was able to see it firsthand, live it. And I think it, probably equipped me well to do the things I did in the classroom, probably for this job too. But if your dad was a lawyer, your dad was a banker, or if your mom was a nurse, maybe you have some, like there's various things that maybe you picked up from that.
Yeah. I think my parents kind of have a unique story. My dad stayed at home and took care of the kids while my mom went and ran the business world sort of thing. So I think that has not only like given me perspective on gender roles, but has also like made me feel a lot more empowered as like a woman, being able to go out and work. And then like obviously seeing the business side of stuff through my mom has been really interesting. So I know she used to work for like the Valero corner stores, and so I know a little bit too much about gas stations.
Awesome. Those always, driving through Nebraska when I go home, those always have the cleanest bathrooms. So
they are good bathrooms.
Awesome. Great example. And that's sort of the focus tonight, is like a lot of times in our culture, whether we are white, middle class or not, that culture dominates our world and it dominates education. So if I were working with Caroline and she were a student and I was a teacher, knowing that her idea of gender norms might be different, her idea of female empowerment might be different, her idea of what makes a dad might be different. So like that's a great example of something I would want to consider if you were in like my 6th grade class and I was working with you. Any other examples from your life where you really have some assets or some strengths? And again, something else, if you have something completely off the map, I'd love to hear about it too.
For me, this is Ron. Family outings tie into languages you speak. My family's bilingual. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but I kind of understand it. But if you get my mother and her sisters together, it's like a totally new linguistic scheme, because it's half Spanish, it's half English, and it's kind of easy to follow. But when they get to rocking and rolling with the Spanish tongue, I have to tell them to slow down. So, yeah,
for sure. When you were a student, do you feel like your teachers saw that bilingualism or dual language ability as a strength, or do you think they tried to steer you pretty much just to English, or like what was some of your experience?
For me as a student, I was steered pretty much towards English. I mean, I try to get my mom and even my dad, even my grandmother at home to help me get more fluent, and they just didn't. So I was kind of left way, way back behind the family curve, so to speak.
Gotcha. And then I don't mean to put you on the spot and make this Socratic, but things that you bring to the table with students who are bilingual in your class, like do you make a point to honor that, or do you make a point to do anything special?
I do as much as I can, and here in La Vida, I don't have any bilingual kids, so to speak, or kids that are English language learners. But in Trinidad, when I was there, the last semester I taught, I had one kid that was strictly Spanish. So what we did is downloaded the interpreter apps to where I could speak to my phone and it would interpret what I said in Spanish to him, and then he would speak Spanish in his phone and it would interpret English to me. So it's kind of a cool way to get into that. I mean, I was learning as I was helping this kid, you know, learning his language as I was helping him learn ours. So it was kind of a neat situation.
Cool. That's awesome. And Ed just chatted me. I don't know if everybody can see that, but he said he would like to share, but his son is being quite loud at the moment. But as we can see, one of Ed's assets is being a father, right? Like imagine being a teacher and the things that he's learned, he can cross apply back and forth in his life. Like that's a huge asset at the same time being a teacher and a father. And he's chatting me again. Let me make sure I'm getting saying this right. And he's a licensed stockbroker and investment advisor. Great. Well, he can make it roll bank, which is awesome. As a teacher, you're going to need those skills. Tana, any ideas? I see you got a pet there. I don't know if that's going to.
This is my baby. This is Rumble.
Do you have any funds of knowledge you'd like to share?
So sorry, I'm turning up my computer because Caroline's was up at a second ago. So actually, I was gonna say this earlier, but the family occupation. So my dad has been a principal for 20 years at a Title I school, and then my mom worked at a Title I school, and then my brother was a teacher, and my sister-in-law is a teacher right now as well. So I have like a family, and my grandma's a teacher, and my other grandma. So just like this family of education since I was like a kiddo. And so that brought in a lot of things that I think are really important. So like my dad was the one that started ELL nights that I mentioned like earlier this year. That was specifically to Dane, but so there's things like that that I've seen my dad do that have been very successful. And then what has not been successful, and also like what to expect from higher ups and so on, and like what the power structure is and like how to try to beat it from the inside out type thing. So yeah.
Cool.
And pop culture. I know a lot about pop culture.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. As you can see, that's just sort of like for us to learn a little bit about each other a little bit, but also see that, you know, everybody has funds. No one is assetless. Everybody has worth, including all of your kids. There may be days like Tana was talking about, it's harder to see those assets, right? It can be a tough day with the kids, but they're there. And with some planning, with some relationships, you can bring it out. Cool. So like I said, we're going to be going over, I just want to talk about funds of knowledge right here real quick after that. So there's a link to the Mole article from the 90s. It's pretty seminal in terms of, you know, seeing this idea of funds of knowledge, seeing kids as worth. Every kid has individual worth. And as you can see by this quote, it refers to the historically accumulated and culturally developed bodies of knowledge and skills essential for household and individual functioning and well-being. So back then, this theory was sort of like, they have these assets. It may not directly translate to school, but it's there. Acknowledge that it's there. So now we're going to look at some ways that maybe we can start to leverage some of those funds a little bit into the classroom. So the big questions that we're working with tonight is how can analysis of culturally sustaining teaching practice help extend our understanding of equity in the classroom? It's kind of been equity and justice has been a big theme clearly for the first part of the year. And then what are the ways that we can actively invite in and help sustain our students' funds of knowledge? These are tough questions. I don't think you're going to leave here with answers, but these are things that I really want you to get thinking about, especially now. In the second semester, when we do our unit plan project, the capstone project, sort of like a summative assessment for the program, hopefully a lot of these elements will be in there. And right now, I just sort of want you to be thinking about them, chewing on them a little bit. And then later in the year, we'll sort of look at sort of like being actionable with them. It's kind of the tough part with the theory-heavy PLCs, but I do want to introduce you to this theory because I think it's important moving forward. Our agenda, we did our do now already. We're going to talk about culturally responsive teaching and culturally sustaining teaching. Similar phrases, they're a little bit different, but you might hear them in your work in education, so I want to make sure you're familiar with them. I'm going to share a little bit a story that happened when I was teaching about how I did some of this work. I don't know if I ever totally got there where I wanted to get, but I want to tell that story a little bit. And then I do have some like housekeeping, looking forward type things that I do want to spend some time with moving forward. Cool. So let's dig right into it unless there are any questions or comments or anything. I'm just trying to scan my folks. Okay, great. Cool. All right. I do want to touch briefly on the serious points, but it's sort of been guiding us this whole year, right? So understanding one's role in mediating the outside world, making space for humanity, providing clear and explicit counter narratives to dominant discourse, both social and academic, and disrupting the typical dynamics of control and power. I think all four are present in this PLC, so we don't really need to like go in depth with these, but I just wanted to refresh your mind. We've used these every PLC, we'll continue to do so. But I want to launch into exactly what is culturally sustaining pedagogy. So back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. I'm going to click present so you can see it a little bit better. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Gloria Ladson-Billings, who's a pretty famous scholar out in California, came up with culturally responsive teaching. Essentially, she did a bunch of case studies and saw what were teachers doing well to engage students' culture that may be different than the teacher into the class. Instead of making it just sort of like, I know you're Latino, or I know you're Black, or I know you're Asian, kind of making some meaning around that. Why does it matter? And so she described it as an approach that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically, which is a little bit of a touchy subject. I think you've sort of got to feel out your own political identity and how political you want your class to be, especially in social studies or even humanities, by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So it's sort of like using references to kids' cultures, letting them have a space to show off some things, and maybe explicitly tying to it. Culturally sustaining pedagogy is what we read a little bit about in our pre-work. And Paris just kind of says where it lives, wherever education sustains the lifeways of communities who have been and continue to be damaged and erased through schooling. So obviously in the article that we read for the pre-work, they talked a lot about like Native American students, Latinx students, Black students, as student populations that have almost forever and, for this foreseeable future, will be damaged and erased through schooling practices, but also what we choose to cover in our classes, right? As a history teacher, as a social studies teacher, even as a lit teacher, you can't cover everything and you make choices. Typically, I think we've seen that those choices are to spotlight white dominant culture writers. But as we move further along, we get to hear about different histories. We get to hear about different writers. We get to hear about different groups of people. But it's hard to do. Our textbooks don't always do a great job with that. It's hard to find that curriculum. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. Did anybody else have any thoughts from our pre-reading, anything that really jumped out at you that you thought was interesting? Sorry, I'll go back a slide. I was trying to turn that off. You thought was interesting from the article? Did anything jump out at you, the pre-reading? I see folks looking back. Cool. Well, I'll just kind of move over that for a little bit. But if you remember anything from the pre-reading that you want to throw into any part of this discussion, please do. I'm trying to keep an eye on all of you digitally here so I can hear if you have something to say. Cool. Last year we did the same PD, the same PLC or similar one. And when we left, one of the teachers drew this and brought it back the next time. And it was sort of their understanding of what culturally relevant teaching and culturally sustaining pedagogy is. It's a little bit confusing, but I thought it was kind of cool that the teacher did this on their own, and then it's kind of a cool visual. But culturally relevant teaching, that's sort of the Ladson-Billings, the early stuff that I was talking about. The stuff in the middle is like stuff that is good and we like to see and that teachers are doing to move forward. So critiquing or engaging with society, look at other teachers who do this type of work and try to model your work after that. Invite family and maybe community experts into the class that maybe don't look like you or don't look like what the school typically looks like to share a different angle. Some things that can get a little sticky when doing that, and it might be running through your mind now, and I definitely failed a million times doing this type of work, is using culture simply as a stepping stone. So teaching Lil Wayne as a portal into poetry and just stopping right there and not, talking about anything deeper with that. Or just this very like surface level involvement, or it's not genuine. Like if I would walk into class and, tell my students about like a hip hop album I was listening to or something, they know that's not me and they know that's not genuine. So finding something that works for you and works for them is difficult. But I thought that visual was kind of a cool way to look at it. Cool, so I've given you a lot of information. We have more information in the program. As I think some of you all might have noticed on the survey, there was a question, my teacher knows about my life outside of school. And for a lot of folks, that scored pretty low. And I think in almost all the feedback I gave before that, I haven't seen a lot of the reflections from that lesson. I grade mainly on Wednesday and Thursday, so I'll be doing that tomorrow and the next day. But it seemed like a lot of folks said, I'm really surprised that this is so low. Kids don't think I know what's going on in their lives. I might argue kids don't want you to know what's going on in their lives in some cases, or maybe nobody just asked. I've read some articles recently where kids weren't invited into the conversation, so they're not empowered to project their experience or their values in the conversation. Yeah.
With the survey, sorry, Caroline. With the survey, I actually had quite a bit of trouble. So a lot of students were coming up to me and they're like, I don't feel comfortable doing this because it's only giving me the option to press never. And I was like, what do you mean? And so in the survey, there are multiple questions where my students had to push never because the other options didn't show up. Weird. And it was like the questions would change. And so they're like, Miss Stevens, I don't feel comfortable putting like never, like it was something like, I think the material I learn in class is important or something. And so in every class, it only happened on some computers, the kids could only put never. And so that threw off my data. So the rest of the lessons were kind of hard because they asked me to do like show the data in class and then come up with ways to fix it, but the data wasn't accurate for specific questions. And so that was really hard because the students were also visibly upset about it because they're like, we don't want to give you a never on this. So
that's weird. I've never heard that happening before. I wonder if it's like a tech glitch or something.
I have no idea. I'll ask Caroline, did you have the same problem? Oh, Caroline had a similar problem, so she had to print hers.
Weird. Okay, let me go back and look at it. I'll look at it again. That's the first time that's happened. Sorry to hear that.
No, it's okay. It was just the kiddos like were upset about it. I'll figure out which questions they were, and then I'll let you know. I need to get my dog. Hold on one second.
Okay, cool. Has anybody had that conversation with their students around this specific question where I think the question was, my teacher knows what my life is like outside of school. Typically, and I'll say like historically as my 5th year, working with these teachers, giving these surveys, it's typically one of the lowest questions every year. So I wouldn't feel bad about it or anything. But has anybody had that conversation with students? I'm curious if they had anything interesting to say about that particular response.
In my class, particularly when I addressed that, because it did come up majority of nevers. I try to, and you've seen on some of my videos, I'm always reiterating that, hey, we need to respect that we all come from different backgrounds, different upbringing and whatever. And, this is a place for you guys to project if you so choose to. And that's how I kind of address that one. And it seems like they want to be more open, but there's still just some things that they're going to be continually reserved about. And, unless they get you in your room by yourself with the door closed, they tend not to share as much as one would think with their peers. So, that's where I'm at with that one.
That's interesting. Any other thoughts on that one while we're on it?
And we're still on the one that if the students know a lot about your life, or if we know about their life.
Yeah.
So that one I got a few nevers, but the majority was like sometimes. And so that was pretty interesting because like I feel like they're like kind of there, but not all the way, right?
Yeah. Do you have any idea why they're not fully there?
Or like how does this apply to them, their home life maybe? Try to get more people to talk about it.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's always interesting in the lesson where you take the data back.
I was also surprised by the results on that question. In my reflection, I voiced that because we had just finished our narrative writing unit. And I was like, this is literally an assignment that you could write about yourself in. And in my class, like the moments that are kind of like unstructured are the moments where I feel like I'm actually getting to know the students and like what their lives are like. But I think maybe they think that we don't know as much as we do know about their lives, right? Like I feel like I know a lot about their lives because I get emails from their parents, or I'm visiting with their mom and grandma at Avid night, or like whatever. I'm like talking to the people who know about their lives, but I don't think that my students realize that I have like this bank of knowledge about their lives because it's kind of creepy, but like I do. But maybe the way that that question is interpreted in their minds is like she doesn't know me, like she doesn't know my life.
Yeah.
When I feel like I know maybe more than I even need to know about their lives. But maybe it's the way that the students are interpreting it versus my interpretation of like what their lives look like outside of school is
Right.
different.
If I were in middle school, I was trying to think how I would answer that. It would probably, like, if it were open-ended, I'm probably would have been like, I don't even know who I am right now. You know, like, let alone having my teacher know who I am. Like, it's a tough time. I'm like figuring it out. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Cool. In the CLDE module, we'll do some work with this too. There's one activity around language and cultural exploration. And if you don't teach many, you have an option to like do a home language exploration, or you can do like a culture exploration if you have students, if your students all speak English and you don't have any English language learners. But that's cool. It's sort of a way to see those funds of knowledge and then maybe sustain them somehow in class. So you'll hit that in the CLDE module, which is open now. I think the first assignment was due last week. And then the unit plan, that's our capstone project we'll do in next semester. So you essentially plan like a 3 to 6 week unit. And in that, we start with the students. What do you know about your students? What are they interested in? What do they need? That's where we start with the unit plan, then build out from that. So hopefully we'll be able to have a chance to put some of this thinking into practice then. Sorry. Cool. Anybody want to say something? Sorry. I'm distracted by Ed's cute kid. All right. So for your post-work, I'm jumping to that before I do this next thing. For your post-work, you're going to watch a video from Django Paris, one of the authors of the pre-reading. And I would say he's probably the national leader in culturally sustaining pedagogy right now. He's sort of a rock star in the ed world. The post-work, he shows a case study of a teacher that he worked with, and she uses hip-hop. She's African-American. She uses hip-hop to talk about language and what language is valued in the classroom. There's a video of her doing that, and then he sort of breaks it down. So I want you to watch that video. I think it's only like 5 minutes. That'll be post-work. And then you follow up with some questions about her. And then there are some like reflection questions about your own classroom and how you can maybe move to do some of that, or how you can start thinking about that. But in terms, I didn't want to show a video here because we're online. It seems weird. But I wanted to talk about one thing that happened in my class. And so I'm just going to share that story a little bit, and then I'll break it down a little bit. But specifically, if we think about culturally sustaining pedagogy as honoring some sort of culture that's not that monocultural of white middle class empowerment, that type of stuff, then I think this definitely fits. And the subculture that I brought out was like more broadly Latinx culture, or like Mexicano, Chicano culture in North Denver, and even mining a little bit further down than that, undocumented Latinx students. So here are some pictures, and those are sort of like the placeholders to remind me. So I taught at Strive Prep, which was not a great fit, honestly. Like, it's very behaviorist, and it's very like college focused. Every classroom is named for a college. There are college pennants everywhere. The teacher would yell, "Why are we here to strive for college?" was like the mantra for the school. And as you can see in this photo, it says like college class of whatever it is. But like, even if they were 6th graders, they were the college class of 2022 or something like that. And so like that message, like initially I was like, yeah, like what's wrong with college? But as I got out of the first year into the second year and beyond, students really weren't buying into that college vision. I was getting a lot of pushback on it. And so one day in my class, it was a writing class at the time, we walked back to class, and one of the students, Javier, said, this is stupid. I hate hearing that every time, and I don't want to hear it anymore. And I was like, he's one of my best students, Javier, what's going on? And he said, I'm undocumented. Like, going to college, A, I can't go. B, there's no way I could possibly afford it. And I was like, there's no way that's real, especially coming from my background of that white monoculture, right? I'm cisgendered, I'm male, I'm straight, I'm white. All of those things empowered me and like sort of made me blind to the idea of like, what does it mean to be documented or not documented? And so that whole year, we really just dug into it. What's the reality? What's the reality of going to college if you're undocumented and you're going to elementary or middle school and high school in Colorado? And at the time, there was no legislation to give undocumented students in-state tuition. So Javier was an honor student, and he was all throughout high school. There's a very real possibility once he graduated, he would have to pay out-of-state tuition to go to CU or CSU or Metro or CU Denver, because he couldn't prove he was a Colorado citizen, let alone a citizen of the United States. And so as we started to learn about that, we wrote narratives about ourselves, specifically through the lens of documentation. I made it very clear that students didn't have to tell me if they're documented or not, but that would stay with me. If they wanted to explore, a loved one's documentation, or a struggle with, an uncle being deported, or a dad living in fear of that, or whatever it might be, that was cool. But essentially it was, what is documentation? How do we fit into it? They wrote narratives about that. And then the next step was they did sort of a school/neighborhood report card where they walked to school, walked around in school, and sort of saw where is our vision, these undocumented students, where does that show up, either on the walls, in the classes, in the content, in the relationships, versus where does sort of that white monoculture show up, where we don't feel a part of that because we're not citizens of this country. So we did sort of a report card about that, seeing like, how did the school meet your needs, how didn't it? And then we had a policy proposal that was sort of two-pronged. One was to try to pass this bill, the asset bill, which is passed now. So if there's an undocumented student who graduates from a Colorado high school and they went to that high school for, I believe, 3 years, they can qualify for in-state tuition. So that's a huge difference, especially at a place like, even CU Denver. I think it's like, it's a $10,000 difference, I believe, every year. So it's big. And so we crafted that policy. We wrote to legislators. Each student picked, or a group of students picked a legislator, investigated them as much as they could, and then crafted arguments specifically to that person. And so we were lobbying legislators every day. And eventually we were invited to the Capitol, where we presented about the asset bill, why we think it should happen and such like that. It did not pass that year. And I was really worried about that, because the whole year was based on, let's fix this problem, let's do something. And it didn't pass, and I was super, super scared about that. I thought the kids would turn on me, but they didn't. A group of about 12 kids, even though they went to 7th grade, would come after school, before school, on my breaks, into 6th grade, and we crafted a professional development for white teachers, or I guess all teachers, what they need to know about teaching undocumented students. And this was even this year. So Edgar and Carlo were in that class. And earlier this year, they led some PDs with me at Aurora Public Schools about what undocumented students need. And, I taught them, like 8 years ago, maybe. So it's really cool to see them back in it. I was able to take them to the asset bill signing. These two, they were able to see that firsthand and meet the governor. It was really cool. And the next step coming out of it is when we talked, we were like, we need to do this, this, this. And the kids were eventually like, Mister, we just need some money. We need some money to go to college. We can't get financial aid because we don't have some of the paperwork needed for that. There aren't a lot of scholarships to go to undocumented people. We need money. And so we actually started a teacher-funded scholarship in the network, in the Strive network. And this year, Javier, the one who said, I don't want to say Strive for College, he actually won that. And that was the difference to enable him to go to CSU on an engineering scholarship, which is really cool. So that's sort of like my story. I'm going to break it down here in a little bit, but I did have 2 links here if you're interested. One, there's a news article on that scholarship. Javier isn't in it, but another one of the students in that class, Chiselle, is featured in that. It's kind of cool. There's some video with it too when she won the scholarship. And then there's a chapter in a book that has 3 case studies in it. And what I just told you is one of the 3 case studies. There are 2 other case studies from Denver as well, but I linked to that in case you wanted to know more about that. But I wanted to break down, like, how does that qualify as CSP, or culturally sustaining pedagogy? I think the first thing was I created like a space that was safe to share. Sharing that you're undocumented, research shows, is a lot like coming out that you're LGBTQ, or you're gay, or you're lesbian, or and so it's like a very delicate, you don't want to force that. And I think I sort of crafted those relationships and trust through things like the passion posters that we did the first time that we met in a remote PLC. I did that day 1 with kids. Narrative writing, I always modeled writing about like very difficult times, or very like maybe provocative times, or times, struggles that I went through. And I think modeling that enabled the students to share more in their narratives, which helped them know me better because I modeled it, and then I read the writing, knew them better. Also, what I call like critical forums, I gave that expository writing, which was supposed to be, just like a report card, like sort of non-biased, but gave them the openness to, hey, criticize the school, criticize the community. Is there something you see that you don't like that maybe we can take up as a class and make a little bit better? And that was actually really hard for kids to like criticize. They really tried to tell me what they thought I wanted to know. And I would say of this whole project, that was like the hardest part, is busting through that. Oh, Mr. Stickney wants me to say this. It's like, no, I want to hear what you have to say. And I think I had to put a lot of work in that. And then coming out of that, I structured class with whole class discussions and trying to lobby kids to adopt one issue. So undocumented student rights was definitely like a strong one, but one group of girls was really excited about doing like child abuse. Another group was into sex trafficking. There were like different things, but I wanted the class to have one focus, obviously, for my planning to be easier. And so they like lobbied each other, but it was cool for them to have those discussions about their topics, push and pull, share. That was some neat moments. And then the exploration of self in a political lens. Again, I know that's touchy. I don't know how political you like to get in class, how comfortable you are with that. But documentation, being documented, that's very political, obviously, as we can see in our administration with the wall and whatnot. The child detainment camps, going there is a political move. And then writing about yourself through that lens of documentation was a political move too. Definitely ruffled some feathers with my administration. There's some times I thought I might have gotten fired, but we worked through it. Data was good, and I think that's what saved me, unfortunately. But kids were growing, kids were excited. And then these action steps, and all of them were joint productive activities. So it wasn't like I told the kids to do this stuff. I was doing it with them. So I'd like join a group, I'd help research a person, and I'd write my own letter to them that the students were doing as well. Or I'd email them, or I'd call them up. Like I was lobbying them to pass this bill as well, even though I definitely was not part of the subculture that we had made the curriculum. I was not undocumented. I was not Mexicano. I was not Chicano. I was not Mexican. I wasn't Latinx. I wasn't Hispanic. But I was still in it doing with them. And I think that sort of looped back to make these nice relationships again with the kids. And then that commitment to the cause, showing that I was invested, they were invested. They came back the next year. We continued to work together to develop things that we thought were important. It wasn't for a grade. It wasn't for a paycheck. It was things that we thought were important. So this could be considered like critical pedagogy, obviously, because we were criticizing social systems. But I think it also fits a CSP because it put at center that subgroup of Latinx and documented students. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? It can be related to like the topic, or if you just have questions for me about like, you know, what it was like or how it all went down, that's cool too. Any questions or comments?
Yes. So my next unit with my 7th graders and then my 8th graders has a lot of potential to be kind of this like critique on society or critique within the world that we're living in sort of thing.
Okay.
And I am really I don't really care at all. But at the same time, I'm worried about the way my administration is like restricting the things that I want to teach my students, right? And they are very adamant about the fact that like we need to be teaching like these standards this way using this text. And I'm like, but you're missing the point. Like I'm trying to teach them beyond what standards can offer sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested, and we can have this conversation later, but like interested to see how or learn more about how you navigated those issues. And like, and you say like data is what saved you. Like I'd like, and yeah, like how am I supposed to know if data is going to save me?
Yeah. So I think for me, let me answer your question first. I think most people would say there's 2 approaches to working with admin in that regard. One is definitely the above board approach. Say, hey, I know you want me to read this book. I would like to read this text or these articles or this while keeping the standards the same. And here's my argument why these match the standards and why it could be better. That's perfect, right? That's great. In my case, my admin would have just said like carpet blank no.
That's what they're doing.
And for me, it wasn't necessarily the material. I didn't care about that. It was the actual like pedagogical moves. It was like not having kids in slant and like tracking me. And instead they were like spread out, having a conversation. They weren't raising their hands and stuff. Like I got a lot of shit for that. And I just felt like it was not authentic to run a class very regimented when kids are like opening up and sharing something about themselves that I am not a part of. Like it just, for me to like behaviorally control that seemed wrong.
Right.
But yeah, our NWEA test, the one class, this one that I was talking about, they grew 4 years between the first and second administration. So like then the principal came to me, he's like, what are you doing? And like, it's crap that's what got her attention, right, as opposed to kids like working on their identity, getting
And
fired up.
writing to
You're working with their 6th grade teacher to develop a professional development series. That's cool. But she's like, oh, they grew. We can show they grew. And it's like, oh, damn it. So I got lucky there. If they didn't grow, I don't know what would have happened, honestly. The other way then, and this is probably what most people do, is sort of have like 2 sets of books, like financial books, but it's your curriculum. Like there were days when I would do something provocative and I would have a backup lesson in case I was going to be observed or in case I'm seriously. I mean, I know that's like kind of crappy, but like it's code switching.
It's stupid.
Yeah, it's stupid. It's code switching as a teacher. Our kids do that all the time. When they're at home and they walk by the corner store and they come to school, they're different people along the way. Like as a teacher, I kind of like emulated that from them. And granted, like that has a whole host of problems with it, right? Like there could be a lot of problems. So I'm not advocating for you to like go rogue and get fired. Like don't do that. I don't want to be the person responsible for that. But I do think there probably is a sweet spot somewhere on that continuum.
Yeah.
How do you think your admin would respond if you went to them and said, hey, we're doing these standards. You told me to read this book. I would rather read this book, or I'd rather read these 3 Newsella articles about this thing.
And like a big problem that I think is causing all of this too is that our admin they're all brand new. So they're trying not to like do new things because they're covering their own ass, if that makes sense. So she's just getting put in this horrible situation where she could do something amazing and they're like, I don't know if we can do that because I could get in trouble, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole thing.
There's no great answer, and it sucks. And it's like a political – when teaching gets political, when the adults in your school building become the problem and not the kids aren't the focus, that's hard. That's honestly hard. I struggle with that a lot, especially doing this type of work. You saw that I did. I took risks. I went big. And a lot of times it felt like I was going to get burned for it. So I'm not telling you to get burned for it, but maybe we could have this conversation a little bit more offline. Anybody who's interested, maybe there are like small steps to like get there this semester, and the next semester go more. I mean, I think there's a variety of ways to do it, but that's a great issue and a very valid concern, Carolyn. But I'd love to talk more about it. Cool. Awesome. Cool. So that was a little bit of like mine. There's this list of things that Julia, one of the allies, put together, things that educators using CSP have. You can look at that later at some point. But I want to make sure I left enough time to get to our housekeeping stuff. So for the post work, I think I've got it open here. Do you see that? Did it switch from the slides to a Google Doc? Cool. Awesome. Sometimes it doesn't, and I'm talking and just sounding like an idiot. So this is your post work that I want you to do. I'd like it in a week, but essentially watch that 5-minute video, answer these questions. And then there are some questions coming out of that to kind of think about your own classroom and things you do to start like crafting the thinking, maybe linking the steps to do this work at some point. But I'd just like you to share this with me or email it to me, whatever works for you within a week, if that's cool. And when you watch the video, please note, just watch this time. It's a very long video. I don't want you to watch the whole thing. Just watch those 5 minutes where he does the case study of Rashida. Cool. Any questions on that? Awesome. Sorry. Cool. All right. Looking forward. This is pretty much the same stuff as in the glance, but there's one thing I would like to discuss with you tonight. Post work, just showed that is due in a week. All right. So the next PLC is what I want to talk about. I'm actually not going to be available for that one because Julia Cantor, the ally I just mentioned, and I were actually presenting about our video coaching, Aspire's video coaching, and how we use it at a conference in Dallas, Texas. I'm not exactly excited about it, but it's something I have to do. But we present that day and like fly out that night, so I'll be on a plane, so I won't be here. But we could do a variety of things. We can move the date. I could zoom you into like the local PLCs. As Ed knows, though, our Wi-Fi there is crap and it doesn't really work that well. So I don't think that really makes sense. One thing I was thinking about, I would kind of like to talk about, Carolyn, Texas, right? If you know of any good spots in the Dallas area that I should check out for tacos or cerveza, let me know. One thing I'm thinking about, I would like it to sort of hinge on student work. And so I'd like your ideas since you're the ones that are going to be doing this. How would you feel about taking some student work, scanning it in, sharing it with me, and then recording a very short Go React video about what you see in the student work? What was the context around it? What was the assignment? What was the objective? how do you think they did? And then getting feedback from other teachers around, when I look at this work, I think trying XYZ would be a good next step, or maybe doing this would be good. Or when I see the student work, I notice it's strong here, weak here. How do you feel about doing that? So we wouldn't meet at PLC, but we would do about, I don't know, let's say it's the same amount of time, like 2 hours of work, just spread out and sort of through Go React, where we're sharing student work with the people in this group and we can get feedback. How does that sound? Does that sound like a good alternative? And that way we don't have to be on the call at that singular time, but we're still doing the work and we're doing it collaboratively. Thoughts?
That kind of works for me. I'm getting ready to start a section. We're in weight management and body composition. And so I did it kind of uniquely with some of the questions that were on the survey. I asked difficult questions and took the kids out of their comfort zone. I mean, stuff that was culturally specific or ethnically specific. And I asked them questions about, what they think, whom they think in society is affected most by factor X or factor Y or factor Z. And, they had a pretty good discussion. Anyway, I'm heading to a direction in my class where they're going to have to do a commercial.
Wow.
And they're going to have to not only design it to attack a specific culture, maybe audience of the similar culture, but also to the broader spectrum of society in general. So I think that might tie in well with what I'm doing on these, these sensitive cultural topics is for sure.
That's awesome. And then that could be some of the student work we look at?
Yes.
No, that'd be awesome. That's cool.
And with that, you guys were talking about how not to get in trouble. I took that to my superintendent, and since this is a new elective course, she said, kind of help create your own curriculum, she told me. And so I was pretty open with her about, where I'm at with this program specifically for my licensure. And she wants to be active in that. She wants to see this happen, and she wants to pull in colleagues to try to maybe get some of these types of activities going within their own class. So I think, be open and just go for it. I mean, within the boundaries. I mean, there's some sensitive stuff, and I know there's political stuff, but if they want us to go over this culturally linguistic and diverse students. I mean, I just got the email from my superintendent from CDE and the requirements and stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they can be so critical on how you're approaching that. As long as you are relevant to the standards and you're adhering to the standards, an approach is an approach is an approach. I mean, I picked that up at Adams State University and their teacher program there. So. I was open and willing to explain to her what we're going to do. So I think I'm up for this. I'm up for sharing those types of
Cool.
things.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah. And if it can be work about like this topic or this cultural work, if you have something you want to share, that's like double dip and that's great. But if you just want to share like an essay or a worksheet or something that's not related to this type of work, that's cool too. The idea is to sort of start examining that student work, seeing what are kids doing well, what are they maybe missing, and then getting some ideas from the group around things we do to meet those needs. So that's perfect. Does everybody else think you can find something? I'll send out more detailed directions as we get closer. That's a full month away. But is everybody just give me a thumbs up if you think you can handle that? You can be right. Cool. Okay. Cool. Sweet. Sounds good. Great. Thanks so much. Yeah. Cool. Here are the due dates for Power School Learning. As we mentioned, CLD. We're in full CLD swing. None of you are in DPS, but Ron did mention the CDE is incorporating some new standards that I don't know. You might not be necessarily beholden to them now, but the foundation we're giving you, I think, can be used to, attack all of those, of course. And in DPS, these teachers they would have to go to classes if they didn't do this module. So it's a big topic we're moving forward with. As you know, just looking at the module, it's huge because we're going to be in it for a while. There is one special education assignment sprinkled in November. You don't necessarily have to do it then. I would just love that special education module. There are 3 of them. Would love that done by January. So if you want to save that for Christmas break, or if you just want to have that whole time off, it's up to you. But yeah, just want to make sure we're in a striking distance for that next semester so you get your licensure with no problem. In terms of Go React, the student voice activity, where you take the survey data back, that video was due. If you haven't gotten that in yet, don't worry. When it's done, please get it in. We have another check-in video in the 16th. Please do partake in those. Share what you need some help with, give some ideas to other teachers. It's cool to see that, and there are some teachers struggling. I know we each have our funds of knowledge that we can help out with. And then part of CLDE is high support, high challenge. There's an activity you plan about that later, much later in the module, but I'd like to see the video of whatever you plan December 14th. It could be a 10-minute activity. It could be an hour-long activity, whatever it is, just let it roll for however long that activity goes. And then we'll talk about this in next PLC, but by the end of the calendar year, by the 28th, I don't know why I put that date. I think it just fit the cycle. I would just love a semester reflection. You've taught for a semester, specifically this semester. What's gone really well in the classroom? What hasn't? What are some goals moving forward next semester? But I'll share more about that. But that's sort of like the whole look of everything that's due and required from now until holiday break. Any questions, comments about that? Same stuff that's in the glance, pretty much. Cool. One last thing I want to talk about very quickly. Should get this done pretty quick. I have a request. One is, when you think about it, we've had some schools reach out and they're like, our teachers in this program, we don't know who to talk to. And they've been sort of worked up about that. None of your schools. But at some point, if you could just email your coach and CC me on it and say, hey, just want to let you know I'm in the Aspire to Teach program. Dane's my ally. We work together. We do PLC and stuff. But if you ever have any questions or concerns about the program or anything, you want to reach out, he's on the email. Do that. I just like an introduction with the coach in case they have anything they want to reach out about. Nothing's wrong or anything. We've just realized our communication this year hasn't been great on that level. So if you do that at some point, I'd just like them to know that I'm here for them if they have questions. And yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean by coaches?
Yeah, so it depends. It could be different in the buildings. In some buildings, it's like a principal is the coach for everybody.
Okay.
In some, it's like a grade level chair. In some, it's like a mentor. If you have all of those people, just pick the one that you like to work with the most or that maybe works closest with you. Just in case there's a problem or they have a concern or something, they can reach out. Cool. Last thing I want to talk about, and again, this is sort of like a long view. We'll talk about this more at the December PLC. But we like to give you an evaluation at the end of the first semester, but it's sort of a protracted, as most things are in licensure, a protracted cycle to get that done. But basically, if you go to Haiku, does everybody see, it used to be called Haiku, it's called Power School Learning. Does everybody see Power School Learning? Cool. This is the Aspire Evaluation and Assessment Resources. And so before eventually before the end of the year, we'll each touch base very quickly, one-on-one, and we'll just sort of talk about where we see things being in terms of your teaching. But we want 3 views for that. One is like, what have I seen in your teaching? But 2, an important one is, what do you see in your teaching and growth this year? And a third one is, what do your evaluations see? And so I clearly know what I think, and I'll be working on that and getting those ready for those conversations. But the 2 other steps you can complete in this module, there is a video explaining this whole module if you want to watch it on the landing page. But there's a self-assessment that's just a Google survey. We'd like you to take one at the end of the first semester, one at the end of the second semester. Essentially, you just hit it. It's a Google survey, and it's like you rate yourself, how you think you're doing. And then I should probably only take like 5 or 10 minutes. And then once you get a teacher evaluation, if you remember back in the sheet we had you sign when you joined the program, it said you have to share 2 evaluations with us throughout the year. When you get like an evaluation, you may have already gotten one, you may have one coming up. You can upload that. Upload that right. Where is it? I'm not seeing it. Right over here. There's the Dropbox on the other side. So the semester 1, semester 2 again. Just upload your evaluations. Those are safe. I probably won't even look at them honestly until we have our one-on-one check-in. And so we'll kind of talk about like, here's what I'm seeing, here's what you're seeing. Now let's just make sure that it's just kind of aligned with the teacher evaluations. Because I think I've told you each individually when I onboard you, the only time this job has gotten really difficult is at the end when we're like, this guy was great, this gal was great, let's license him. And the school's like, no, we have major reservations. Doesn't happen often, but by seeing evaluations, we can know what the school thinks about you and be more of an advocate if that would ever come up. I don't think it's going to. It's only happened like twice in my 5 years doing this, but it was a really crappy situation to be in, thinking that we were in agreement with the school, and at the end, we licensed the person, the school didn't offer them a job back, and that really sucked. But this process, we see that as a way to sort of like mitigate that. So you'll do the self-assessment, which is a quiz, and then you'll upload whatever your teacher evaluation looks like. It can be with one from the district. It can be, something from your coach, something from your principal. I've seen these look massively different school to school, district to district. There's no set template, just whatever you've got, upload it. And then we can triangulate our thoughts on your teaching with that evaluation and make sure everything's square. Does that make sense? Cool. There's no real timeline for this. I would like this done by the end of the semester. Obviously, I would like to talk to you before winter break. So if you could do this stuff before winter break, we could find some time to talk real quick about what I'm seeing, you're seeing, the evaluation sees. But this is coming up. We'll talk about this again. I guess we won't have that December PLC, but I'll be looping back to this in the glance and other emails. But when I did, I just wanted you to know what that was talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any questions? And again, we've got plenty of time to work through this. So if you're working through it, you want to do it and it's confusing, please just stop, reach out to me, and we can figure it out. Cool. Awesome. Well, I will stop there. The post work is linked to a couple different places. It's linked from this worksheet on slide 12, and it's also linked in the looking forward. And again, just watch 5 minutes of that video, not the whole video. Cool. If you have any questions or anything you want to stay on the line, please do. Otherwise, take off. Have a great rest of the week. We'll do something different on December 4th for that PLC, like I said, through GoReact, but we'll be in touch. We'll see each other through Zoom or on the phone or something before then. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Zane.
Yep. Bye.